Hello friends, as promised last time, today I will discuss something related to Jammu and Kashmir. I am combining the newspaper analysis of 5th as well as 4th and 5th August, because on both these 2 days there were two issues dominating the newspapers. One was Kashmir issue and the other is Ayodhya issue. So because of extremely political nature of Ayodhya issue, as of now, I don't conceive a probable question in exam on that issue. But because Kashmir issue deals with the Indian constitution, there can be a question in the exam. Besides in the exam, Kashmir issue can also be discussed in your interviews. There can be a question over that. So let us try to get more clarity. I have gone through the articles that have come in the newspapers, like Happy Mon Jacob's article, Madan Lokur's article, one talking about human rights violation, and Jacob's article being critical of the government's approach. So my perspective is we cannot take much from these articles from the perspective of exam, but the issue of Jammu and Kashmir continues to remain very relevant. So it is expected from the students that they should have a more balanced and a pragmatic understanding of the issue. And as in civil services, you are going to be a part of the state. You are not going to be a part of some human rights movement, nor you are going to be some researcher or philosopher going for some out of box thinking. Considering the highly emotive nature of the issue, I would recommend that understand this issue from the perspective of the exam. This issue is relevant for your paper 1, post independence development, obviously for your paper 2, as well as from the perspective of your paper 3, the national security angle. Now on 5th August 2019, a very fundamental change has happened in context of Article 370. And more important than what the change has happened, it is more important to understand how this change was brought about. What was the procedure? So my present discussion will be focusing on what changes have been brought and also in what manner government has brought the changes, because I found confusion prevailing among the students with respect to the manner of the change. What will be, since the matter is sub judice, we cannot go much into the validity, but still, like, what will be the probable position of the Supreme Court with respect to it, and then I will give my overview with respect to dealing with the issue of Kashmir. Now, to start the discussion, I would like to start the discussion by one of the quotes, some quotes, one by Pandit Nehru, who had a special connection with Jammu and Kashmir, and the other by Kalhan. You must be aware of Kalhan, the author of Raj Tarangini, one of the most important book with respect to the history of the kings of Kashmir. So somewhere maybe in your answers or in your discussions you can use these comments. Fine. So if I quote Pandit Nehru has compared Kashmir with supremely beautiful woman fine. So I will give you the exact quote of Pandit Nehru. His quote was, Kashmir, like supremely beautiful woman whose beauty is almost impersonal and above human desires. So from here we can consider that this is his words. Kashmir is like a supremely beautiful woman whose beauty is almost impersonal and above human desire. Fine. And now next I give you the quote of Kalhan, the author of Raj Tarangini, who held that Kashmir can be won only by spirit and not by the force only and not by the force of sword. Sorry, so I'll just reframe it. Kashmir can be won only by the force of spirit and not by the force of sword. So he said Kashmir can be won only by the force of spirit. Force of spirit means love and not by the force of sword. Okay. Now in these articles I found that scholars are putting a question mark on the strategy of the government. And their question is, by scrapping Article 370 or by making Article 370 ineffective, it's not that this is going to change the situation, or is it going to bring any sort of resolution of the conflict. So regarding this, suppose similar type of question is asked in interviews. So regarding this, you can give more balanced approach. The balanced approach is, if we look at Kashmir, Kashmir can be considered as one of the most interactable, multi-layered conflict. And here the conflict is happening not only between the people of the state and India, it is also not happening between the two nuclear armed neighbors. It also involves the major powers, and every passing year we see the battle becoming more complicated. It involves Kashmir, it involves China, it involves US, it involves Russia, it involves Iran, it involves Saudi Arabia, it also involves Turkey. And metaphorically also, or sorry, in a metaphysical terms also, in Kashmir, it is not just the battle for the land and its resources. In Kashmir, there is also a metaphysical conflict, the metaphysical conflict between the idea of India, the idea of Pakistan, a metaphysical conflict between radicalism, secularism, and what all not. So the conflict is too complex. Hence, from a practical point of view, thinking about a conflict resolution, that too which satisfies all the stakeholders, appears to be a utopian task at present. Hence, our approach with respect to the Kashmir should be, instead of conflict resolution, which should remain a long-term desire, our approach at present should be for the conflict management. I am again repeating this word, go for conflict management. Now suppose in interview they ask you to elaborate, what do you mean by conflict management? So you can simply say that the conflict management means the situations do not deteriorate further. It means that the cost in terms of the economic cost and also the human cost should remain within the limits. It should not reach beyond the acceptable limit, or the loss of the human life or the economic cost should not cross the threshold. Now I will discuss what happened on 5th August and what are its implications. Now it is always desirable to have a brief understanding of Kashmir's history, the modern history of Kashmir, a brief understanding of Article 370, the approach of the government and the appropriateness of the approach. I will discuss the three broad approaches in context of dealing with the Kashmir issue, which were in front of Government of India. One was the approach with which we have been doing. The second is the approach which the majority of the intellectuals propound, but we can also discuss the dangers involved in that approach. And third, the approach which the present government has taken, the pros and cons. Somehow I can say that after the Uri attack, after Pulwama attack, business as usual was not possible and we had to change. There had to be some change in the rules of engagement. So I will discuss the three broad approaches with respect to Kashmir, and I will discuss how to rationalize the present approach of the government. See, my discussion at present, whatever I am doing right now, is simply focused on the civil services examination, that how when a candidate is put in a difficult situations, how that candidate should respond and what should be the approach. I am not expressing my personal opinions, I am not expressing any of my normative judgments, the way I have found the normative judgments in the newspapers. So I hope I have made it clear. Now very quickly I will do that part of the history, which dates or the events which are important for our today's discussion, and the focus of today's discussion is to understand what change has been made in the status of Jammu and Kashmir after the government has passed the resolution on 5th August 2019. So that is my focus, and then we will try to understand the rationale behind the approaches. Fine. So as you know that after independence, Indian Independence Act of 1947, and because of Indian Independence Act, the paramountcy of the British had lapsed on the princely estates, and legally speaking, the princely estates were free. There were around 563 princely estates, and they had an option either to remain independent or to join either of the dominion. The issue of Kashmir was specific because Kashmir was the only state that was touching the boundary of both India and Pakistan, as well as the peculiar situation where the king was Hindu, whereas the majority of the population was Muslims. One of the reasons for the present conflict can also be the approach of Maharaja Hari Singh, who has taken a decision after lot of delay. So it is believed that Maharaja Hari Singh had certain issues with Pandit Nehru because he used to believe that Pandit Nehru is a friend of Sheikh Abdullah, and Sheikh Abdullah was a person who was building a movement against the rule of Maharaja. Fine. So because Maharaja Hari Singh took time in deciding his accession to India, that too he agreed to join India only after Pakistan made attack in the form of the natives when then Pakistani army men entered into the Kashmir. So all these stories you know. What you have to understand is the instrument of the accession. So like all other states, Maharaja of Jammu and Kashmir has also signed instrument of accession, and the date of instrument of accession was 26th October 1947, and the instrument of accession was signed on three subjects: defense, foreign affairs, and communications. Because of the circumstances, before Maharaja signed instrument of accession with India, he had also signed a standstill agreement with Pakistan. So Pakistan does not accept the validity of instrument of accession, and because the conditions under which the instrument of accession was signed, Pandit Nehru has also given this promise that the final integration of the state with rest of the India will depend upon the will of the people of Jammu and Kashmir. However, because of Pakistan occupying a significant territory of Kashmir, which is at present known as Pakistan occupied Kashmir, and Pakistan not agreeing to withdraw its forces, the plebiscite could not happen, and hence right now from Pakistan's point of view, plebiscite is one of the option for its solution, but from India's point of view, the ground situations have changed so much that plebiscite is not possible. And the second thing is because we already had conducted the election for the Constituent Assembly of Jammu and Kashmir, there is no further need of plebiscite. Now, the next important event in the evolution of the Kashmir issue is the participation of the members of the interim government of Jammu and Kashmir led by Sheikh Abdullah in the Constituent Assembly, which led to the formation of Article 370, which defined the relationship of the state with Indian Union. So, Article 370 was placed in the transitional and temporary provision, and it was held that the final integration will be decided, or the final constitutional legal relationship will be decided by the will of the people. Since the situations of plebiscite were not existing, Pakistan was not ready to withdraw its forces. How people will exercise their will? This condition is fulfilled when there is a direct election for the Constituent Assembly of Jammu and Kashmir. We should not forget that India's Constituent Assembly is not directly elected, but there cannot be any question mark on the view of the Constituent Assembly of Jammu and Kashmir, because it was elected by the people of Jammu and Kashmir. Fine. So, the Constituent Assembly of Jammu and Kashmir has ratified Article 370. Now, I will tell you the salient features of Article 370. Article 370 has following important features. The first significant feature is that according to Article 70, only two articles of Indian Constitution will apply in case of Jammu and Kashmir, and that is Article 1 and Article 370. Fine. And as per Article 1, what is Article 1? India, that is Bharat, shall be the union of states. Now, Article 1 is applicable in case of Jammu and Kashmir. This makes Jammu and Kashmir as an integral part of India. So, one of the benefit of Article 370 has been that it is a testimony to this fact that Jammu and Kashmir is an integral part of India. Now, second is Article 370 itself. So, Article 370, what does it aims to provide at? So, besides this article, excuse me. So, Article 370, besides telling that the two parts of Indian Constitution, Article 1, which makes Jammu and Kashmir an integral part of India, and Article 370 will apply in case of Jammu and Kashmir. It also tells about three things you can say. First is how Article 370 can be amended. Second, how to extend other provisions of the Constitution in case of Jammu and Kashmir, and the power of union of parliament with respect to Jammu and Kashmir. See, in case you all know that India is a federation. Fine. So since India is a federation, we also have seventh schedule. In seventh schedule, there are three lists: union list, concurrent list, and state list. Now, on the subjects of state list, state can make the laws. Like all other states, in case of even Jammu and Kashmir, on the subject of the state list, the government of Jammu and Kashmir will make law. So this is not a special provision with respect to Jammu and Kashmir. Now, where lies the difference? In case of other states, the subject on the union list and concurrent list, the power on union list lies with union government, and on concurrent list the power lies with both, with primacy given to union. But by virtue of Article 370, there has been a special provision with respect to this context. Fine. So in context of Jammu and Kashmir, union parliament's power to make laws on subjects of union list. There is a difference from other states. What is the difference? The difference is, in case of other states, union neither needed consultation with the state governments nor union needed concurrence with the state government. But in case of Jammu and Kashmir, union required consultation, in some situations consultation, and in some situations concurrence with state governments. Now, where consultation means just consultation but not binding. Concurrence means until and unless the government of Jammu and Kashmir doesn't agree with it. Fine. So the three subjects on the instrument of accession: defense, foreign affairs, and communication. Any subject of union list or state list with respect to which the state of Jammu and Kashmir has signed instrument of accession. In this case, if Union Parliament is to make law, then it can make law only with the consultation, only after consultation with the state government. Now, with respect to the matters other than which were not a part of instrument of accession, now in such matters, if Union Parliament has to make law, it will require the concurrence of the state government. This is the basic difference between the Jammu and Kashmir as well as other states. We should not forget that India is an asymmetrical federation and there are special provisions not only with Jammu and Kashmir, there are special provisions with respect to Nagaland, with respect to Mizoram and other states. Even in the states of Nagaland and Mizoram, the governor of that state can modify the laws made by the parliament or the state legislature. So there are some special provisions with respect to these states also, and this is the difference which exists in context of Jammu and Kashmir. Now the other thing is Article 371 also tells Article 370 tells only two articles, Article 1 and Article 370. Fine. They will apply in case of Jammu and Kashmir. Now listen carefully. As per Article 370, two articles will apply, Article 1 and Article 370. Article 1 makes JK as integral part, and then Article 370 tells one thing, how or the manner in which Union Parliament can make laws on union list and concurrent list with respect to the state. Fine. The second thing, it tells that how other articles of the Constitution can be extended. So earlier only Article 1 and Article 370 were applicable. Within Article 370 it is mentioned how other provisions of the Constitution can be made applicable in case of Jammu and Kashmir. Fine. And by virtue of this article, almost every article of Indian Constitution with some exceptions has been applicable in case of Jammu and Kashmir, including the emergency provisions with the exception of financial emergency. Fine. Now this process is to be understood. Fine. The process is the process of how other provisions of Indian Constitution can be extended to Jammu and Kashmir. Fine. So they can be extended by union government, but procedure is what? By the presidential order. That is why Jammu and Kashmir application of the Constitution, this presidential order comes. So the 5th August order was order number 272. Fine. Presidential order. Now again the procedure is, if these provisions are related to the subjects which were there in instrument of accession, then only with the consultation, and if they were beyond on which the state has signed instrument of accession, it can be done only with concurrence. So what does this show? This shows that the entire Constitution has not been applicable in case of Jammu and Kashmir, and besides Article 1 and Article 370, if other provisions of the Constitution had to be extended, this can be done only by the presidential order, but presidential order will require consultation in a situation where those subjects are related to instrument of accession, and it will require concurrence in the situation where those subjects were not a part of instrument of accession. Now because the entire constitution has not been made applicable to the Jammu and Kashmir with immediate effect. This was not accepted by the then party Jan Sangh, and Dr. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee was the leader of Jan Sangh, and he gave this slogan, एक देश में दो प्रधान, दो निशान और दो विधान. Vidhan means constitution, do pradhan, because earlier the chief minister of Jammu and Kashmir used to be known as prime minister, and two nishan means two flags, nahi rahenge, it cannot exist. Now the present BJP is a successor of Jan Sangh. In an interview they can ask you a question, do you look at the entire changes brought by the present government as an ideological change? Now, what you can say, you should not say that you look the changes made by the government through the ideological lenses, because remaining outside power and being within the power, there is a big difference. No government can be expected to take decisions of such a strategic nature only from ideological perspective. So you can say that it will be wrong to say that though the party belongs to the ideology of Shyama Prasad Mukherjee, but personally, I don't see this decision as an ideological decision or ideologically motivated decision. Rather, I will look at this decision as a strategic decision, which is a calculated decision taking in the interest of the country as a whole. Fine. So no government can take such decisions on such critical issues only through the ideological sense. One of the flaws of our foreign policy, or you can say our dealing with Kashmir, is said to be that we have often looked at the entire Kashmir issue more from ideological point of view, less from geopolitical perspective. Secondly, we have looked at Kashmir more from the lens of the Pakistan rather than with the bigger lens to see the role of other powers. And also, whenever we have tried to resolve the Kashmir issue, we have focused more on the personalities and less on the people. Fine. So now let us not get sidetracked. Let us not sidetrack the issue. Let us stick to Article 370, and I hope you are understanding the nuances of Article 370. So Article 370 is told that, or tells that, the other provisions of the Constitution can be extended to Jammu and Kashmir, but the only precondition is by a presidential order, for which the precondition is it will be brought either with the consultation or with the concurrence of the Jammu and Kashmir's government. Fine. Now, you understand that there is one important, often it is mentioned Nehru's perspective, but it was also expressed by the then Home Minister Guljari Lal Nanda, and he said that Article 370 is neither a mountain nor he said that Article 370 is neither a wall nor a mountain, but the tunnel through which we will export almost all parts of the Indian constitution. And this is what exactly had done. One of the major resentment in Jammu and Kashmir has been that they believe that the promised autonomy has been eroded and almost all provisions of Indian constitution has been extended in case of Jammu and Kashmir. So Article 370, what was its value? The first value was it was a testimony that Jammu and Kashmir is an integral part. The second thing, Article 370 has been a tunnel to extend the entire constitution in case of Jammu and Kashmir. And the present government has used same tunnel, though this concept was from the Congress party and the BJP has used the same tunnel. Using the same tunnel, it has made it ineffective. Okay, now the third important thing about Article 370 is it tells, Article 370 tells how 370 can be amended. And it tells that Article 370 could be amended by a presidential order. But this presidential order will be brought only on the recommendation of the Constituent Assembly of Jammu and Kashmir. Fine. So Article 370 also tells how the Constitution, how Article 370 can be amended, and it tells that it can be amended only by the presidential order. And to bring the presidential order can be brought only on the recommendation of the Constituent Assembly. Now I will tell you the date that the Constituent Assembly of Jammu and Kashmir was elected in 1951 and it got dissolved in 1957. Fine. So there was a legal question with respect to the interpretation of this clause. In Article 370, it is clause 3, that now if Constituent Assembly of Jammu Kashmir does not exist, how this provision can be amended. Fine. So if you are asked a question, what are the ways to amend Article 370? So there have been two ways to amend Article 370. Article 368. What is that? Article 368 tells about the power and the procedure, the power of Parliament and procedure of amendment, and amendment is done by a special majority. And again, as per Article 370 clause 3. Fine. Now the government has not taken this route because of the government didn't have the special majority required to adopt this particular route. So government has taken this particular route itself. Government has taken Article 370 clause 3 to amend Article 370 itself. Okay, so the clue was already provided by Guljari Lal Nanda, who held that Article 370 is neither a wall nor a mountain but a tunnel. So Article 370 clause 3 was used to amend Article 370. Okay, now let me explain how government has brought the changes on 5th August. Now, before understanding all these issues, it is also important to understand this fact that in 1965, Union government got an amendment done in the Constitution of Jammu and Kashmir. Now, I suppose this is 6th constitutional amendment. I am talking about the amendment in the Constitution of Jammu and Kashmir. Fine. So, the government had got, government means New Delhi government, in 1965 was successful in getting one major amendment in the Constitution of Jammu and Kashmir. Somehow at that point of time, because of defection, the Congress-led government was there in Jammu and Kashmir. And what change it has made? Fine, it has made the change that the Prime Minister of Jammu and Kashmir will now be known as Chief Minister, Sadre Riyasat will be known as Governor. But more than this, the game changer event was that Governor of Jammu and Kashmir will be appointed by the Union. That is why the role of governor in Jammu and Kashmir's politics has always been critical. Fine. So governor is the center's long arm in the state. So what Union government has done? Union government has played a politics. Union government has engineered the defections in Jammu and Kashmir, imposed Article 356, a president's rule or the governor's rule, and then when the Council of Ministers does not exist, at that point of time governor exists, and through the governor the majority of the provisions of the Constitution has been extended. For those who do not know, before 1965, the governor in case of Jammu and Kashmir was not appointed by Union government, rather was elected by the legislature of Legislative Assembly of Jammu and Kashmir. Then the governor was a man of chief minister, but after 1965 governor became the man of center, and governor's role has been a game changer. So this point has to be understood very clearly. Now we come, let me come directly to the changes and the procedures, how the changes were made. Fine. So under the Constitution, Article 370 could have been amended in two ways. First was under Article 368, the special procedure for amendment, and then by Article 370 itself, and here presidential order on the recommendation of the Constituent Assembly of Jammu and Kashmir. So the government avoided this route because of the want of majority. So government used this route. Fine. Now the history of this goes back to 2015. In 2015, most probably this was the year, something very unusual happened. And that unusual was that BJP, an ultra nationalist party, plus PDP formed. PDP, a sort of a more separationist party in comparison to National Conference of Jammu and Kashmir, combined to form the government. And many political pundits were unable to rationalize that how BJP and PDP, the two completely ideologically opposite parties, have joined, but the legislative assembly elections of Jammu and Kashmir were such that there was no clear verdict in favor of the any party. So this was the smart move conceptualized, and it was the very first step towards the changes that were brought on the 5th August. Fine. Now, this government continue till 2018. In 2016, there was a Uri attack. In 2018, BJP pulled out. For actually no reason. Fine. And after BJP has pulled out, governor's rule was imposed as per Article 92 of JK Constitution. Fine. And in case of Jammu and Kashmir, first governor's rule has to be introduced, which cannot extend before 6 months, and only then the presidential rule can be, only then the president's rule can be introduced. Fine. So in June 2018, governor's rule, and this is completed in December 2018, when state was brought under the president's rule. State was brought under the president rule. Now, when there was a governor rule when there was a president rule in February 2019, there was a Pulwama attack. Fine. Now here you see the changes in the policy. In Uri, we have gone for surgical strike, and now after Pulwama, surgical strike across LOC. In Uri, it was within LOC. Fine. Now it remained under the president rule, and then the BJP came back with a thumping majority and a bigger majority in May 2019, and one of the electoral promise of BJP's manifesto was the abrogation of Article 370. Fine. And then in the August, government has taken the preparatory steps like stopping the Amarnath Yatra and then deployment of around 50,000 and more security personnel. Fine. And the government has put all the prominent leaders under house arrest, under preventive detention, and imposed section 144. Now come straight away to the changes. On 5th August 2019, Amit Shah has introduced a presidential order. Has brought a resolution to introduce a presidential order, means application of the constitution in case of Jammu and Kashmir. Okay. Now, what was the procedural requirement to bring this presidential order? The procedural requirement was that this presidential order, with respect to the application of the constitution in case of Jammu and Kashmir, will be brought only with the concurrence of the governor. Now, when the council of ministers is dissolved, then governor represent the executive of the state, and governor is appointed by the union. So on the governor's request, which is the state government, this presidential order is brought. Now this presidential order does two things. First, it says that all the provisions, I'll show that the gazette, all the provisions, or this presidential order says that the presidential order of 1954 is abrogated. Fine. And all provisions of present constitution are extended. When all the provisions of the constitution are extended, now there is no difference between Jammu and Kashmir and other state. And when presidential order of 1954 is abrogated, then one very contentious issue is automatically abrogated, that is Article 35, which introduced 35A, which came into existence because of this presidential order, and this presidential order came into existence because of the 1952 agreement between Sheikh Abdullah and Pandit Nehru. And there has been a demand that Article 35A is against the interest of the people of India, because it prohibits the people from rest part of the country to settle in Jammu and Kashmir on a permanent basis or to purchase the land. So Article 35A automatically gets abrogated because of this. And the second thing is they have made provisions in Article 367 only with respect to Jammu and Kashmir. So they made changes, or they made certain provisions were added in Article 367 only with a state of, only for the state of Jammu and Kashmir. And you know that Constitution can be amended for the state of Jammu and Kashmir only by the presidential order with the consent of a state government, and state government is governor at that time. And Article 367 deals with interpretations, and in this article clause 4 was added, and that had further sub clauses where it says that constitution here means constitution as applicable in Jammu and Kashmir, government of a state means governor, then governor, and last is the constituent assembly will mean the legislative assembly. Now this is most important thing. The constituent assembly in case of Jammu and Kashmir will be the legislative assembly of Jammu and Kashmir. Fine. So now after this presidential order 272, what is being done? By this 272 presidential order of 1954 stands abrogated. Presidential order of 1954 was based on an agreement between Pandit Nehru and Sheikh Abdullah, which was the basis of the relationship between state of Jammu and Kashmir and India, though this order was also amended. Once presidential order of 1954 goes, and it is mentioned that all the provisions of Jammu and Kashmir is applied. Now there is no difference in Jammu and Kashmir and other states. Second thing this presidential order did was it held that for the constitution, constituent assembly will be treated as legislative assembly. Fine. So now the second presidential order is with respect to amendment of Article 370. Now Article 370 could be amended only by the presidential order. This presidential order will be brought by the recommendation of the Constituent Assembly. Fine. Now the Constituent Assembly is now the legislative assembly, from which provision presidential order 272. Fine. Article 367. So the Constituent Assembly is legislative assembly of Jammu and Kashmir, but Jammu and Kashmir is under the president rule. When a state is under the president rule, then as per Article 356, the legislative assembly, the powers of legislative assembly will be exercised by Union Parliament, either directly or through some authority appointed by it. Fine. So the legislative assembly, constituent assembly became legislative assembly because of these two things, and the legislative assembly's power is being exercised by union parliament. Why? Because Jammu and Kashmir has been under the president's rule. So whenever a state is under the president rule, legislative powers are with parliament. Now, the amendment of the constitution will be done by the resolution of parliament. So parliament, which is the legislative assembly, which is the constituent assembly, is requesting the president to bring a presidential order and abrogate Article 360 or amend Article 360. Abrogation may not be the right word. Amend Article 360. I hope you have understood. So, Home Minister Amit Shah brought a resolution in Parliament. Now, this resolution says that amend Article 360. From where the Parliament got that authority? Because of the President's rule. The powers of Legislative Assembly are with Parliament. Fine. And Legislative Assembly is the Constituent Assembly because of the changes in Article 367 by Presidential Order 272. This is a Presidential Order 273, and by which Article 370 has been amended. Fine. So now how Article 370 looks at present? Article 370 in its amended form says that all provisions of the Constitution will apply in case of Jammu and Kashmir. So on 5th August, 5th and 6th August, in 2 days, 4 things happened. First was Presidential Order 272, by which 1954 Presidential Order is abrogated and rest of the Constitution is extended, and changes in 367 is made. And then Amit Shah has brought 2 resolutions in Parliament. The first resolution is for amendment of Article 370. So this resolution is brought in Parliament because Parliament is acting as a legislative assembly and legislative assembly is acting as the constituent assembly. So constituent assembly of Jammu and Kashmir is now the union parliament, and that is requesting president to amend Article 370. Fine. And the amended Article 370 says all provisions of the Constitution are applicable and rest of the provisions are abrogated. Now it brought JK reorganization bill, by which Jammu and Kashmir was to be divided into and it is made a union territory, and it was divided into Ladakh and Jammu and Kashmir, the 2 union territory, one with assembly and other with the other without assembly. And it was also provided that the reorganization of the territorial constituencies have been done, because up till now the electoral districts have been constituted that used to give weightage to the to the voice of valley over Jammu. So after new delimitation, this balance will be restored between Jammu and Kashmir. Fine. So now how JK reorganization bill was brought? So as per the constitution, article 3, whenever you have to reorganize a state, president will seek the opinion of the state legislature, but state legislature is dissolved, so parliament is exercising its power. So even president has asked parliament has given this opinion that you reorganize the state of Jammu and Kashmir. So these are few things that have happened on that day. So these are the provisions of the constitution. You can read, this is article 370, and you can say that you can read that the provisions of the constitution can be amended on the recommendation of the Constituent Assembly. Fine. Then quickly I will show this, the Constitution application to Jammu and Kashmir Order 272. So this order says Article 1954 is superseded by this order, and it says that all the provisions of the Constitution shall apply. And then it also says Article 367 is being amended, and the most important thing is Constituent Assembly will now be the legislative assembly. This is the application order. Then these are the two resolutions which Home Minister has brought in case of Jammu and Kashmir, that so Parliament is a legislative assembly and Parliament is requesting the President, this House recommend that following public notification should be issued by the President. Fine. This is with respect to Article 370. All provisions of this Constitution will be applicable. And second resolution is about reorganization of Jammu and Kashmir. And then the bill bill on Jammu and Kashmir. Fine. So now quickly I will tell you this unchecked preventive detention article, and this is by Madan Lokur, but you will not have to take this position of human rights issue, though this case you remember, but not in this context, as an important case in case of preventive detention law. And this article is written from government's perspective that this will bring development and all. You can read a change that hit federalism. Fine. So he is again quite critical of the government and not very relevant. Then Happy Mon Jacobs, even I don't agree with this article, and the perspective of this article from the perspective of the exam. Now so there is nothing much that we can actually take from all these articles. Fine. Now I will discuss the three grand strategies with respect to Jammu and Kashmir. The first strategy can be called as attrition, the strategy of attrition. The second strategy is, I'll just check. Abdication. And the third grand strategy is assimilation. So, there are among the policy makers, there have been three major strategies, grand strategies with Jammu and Kashmir. First is abdication strategy. Fine. Abdication strategy is propagated by the intellectual class here, like Happy Mon Jacob's article or Madan Lokur's article. I am not pointing towards any intellectual, but I am in general intellectuals like Arundhati Roy. Fine. So, what is their position? Their position is, this is an abdication strategy. According to this position, India has neither a strong moral or legal position in Jammu and Kashmir. Fine. And they suggest that government to accept the demand of the people in Jammu and Kashmir. So, as you know, the ordinary people will never be able to speak. Who will speak on behalf of the people of Jammu and Kashmir? The political leaders of Jammu and Kashmir, who will obviously take a separatist stand. And if we go by the abdication or the approach, I will say the approach of the intellectual class concerned about the legal and the moral claim and the human rights and all, what will be the end result? The end result will be somewhere government conceding to the separatist demand. Fine. What will be the practical implication? Autonomy, pre-1954 status or complete independence, so-called Azadi for Jammu and Kashmir. This is the logical culmination of the approach of the intellectuals who are talking about the fact that India has no legal claims because of two-nation theory or no moral claims. Fine. but these are the same intellectuals who also talk about the idea of India in the rest part of the country, but they are not so much vocal about the fight of the idea of India in this part of the country. You will have to understand that there is hardly any section in this part or among the political community in Jammu and Kashmir which adhere to the idea of India. So what happens is that the separatist trend is actually the rejection of the idea of India, and we will also have to see the implication for the rest of the country, where Hindus and Muslims, they coexist, and this will have an implication on their future relationship also. So this strategy will result into abdication of Jammu and Kashmir because we do not have a moral claims, but it will have a more disastrous consequences in the sense the application of the coexistence of Hindus and Muslims in the rest part of the country, and it can also flare up the secessionist trends in the other regions which are otherwise subsided. Fine. So it is called abdicationist strategy because India is sure to lose in this way if you go by the experiences of those who have seen the ground situation. Fine. Now the second strategy is the attrition driven. Attrition driven means long drawn war. This has been our strategy up till now. Fine. This is what that India go for maintaining a security grid, and it is based on this assumption: maintain a security grid, fine, and engage the militants in the war of attrition in the hope that one day a war weariness will come and gradually the people in Kashmir, they will stop the support to the militants and this war will fade out or die its own death. So point number 2, and they believe that at present India is able to manage the cost in terms of the military or in terms of the loss of the people as well as the resources. Now attrition based strategy is also not going to be very helpful because we have seen that the militancy has actually grown and the cost is increasing, and the nationalist movements, they do not die the natural deaths like this, and attrition strategy has been continuing. So attrition strategy had two features: not changing the constitutional status of Jammu and Kashmir, maintaining the security presence in Jammu and Kashmir, go for the long drawn battle. India is capable to bear the economic cost and the bearable loss of manpower, and we should hope that war weariness come in Jammu and Kashmir. But after Uri and Pulwama, it has been realized that this strategy is not working, and the rules of engagement with the separatist sections in Jammu and Kashmir as well as with Pakistan have to be changed. That is why we have gone for the surgical strike across LOC and we will have to try for something else. Abdication is not an option. Attrition we are already doing, but we are not achieving the desired result. So what is left? The last strategy that is left is the assimilationist strategy. Assimilationist strategy is based on the view that we have to go for the change in the constitutional status of Jammu and Kashmir, or change the Article 370, because it is believed that Article 370 and related to it so assimilationist strategy suggests that you have to bring the constitutional change, because it is believed that Article 370 plus Article 35A has prevented, or it has created, the legal and foundational basis for separatism, or it creates a block that prevents the full integration of the state. And because of this, there is a freeze in demography and the politics of the region, and maintaining Article 370 and 35A has actually not helped. It has not brought any change. Continuation of Article 370 and 35A has not added to the final integration, which was the ultimate objective. The ultimate objective was that is why from India Article 370 was temporary, because the idea was there will be a day where complete integration will happen, but the history started moving in the reverse direction and more alienation and separatist trends have developed. So we had three strategies: abdication, not possible; attrition we are doing, but we are not achieving anything. So why not change something new? Why not change the rules of engagement? And the maintenance of continuation of Article 370 is not serving its purpose, because the long-term purpose was the full integration, and it is believed that it creates a structural block in not allowing the complete integration. So since no other strategies have been working, there is no harm that we should have tried with this particular strategy. Fine. So keeping this strategy in mind, the present changes have been introduced, and the government draws its support from the massive victory it has got in the 2019 election and the mandate from the people from rest part of the country. So in the end, this is always a reason that even this may not work, but if we will not try, how can we say that this have not worked? Abdication, not an option. Attrition we did, but we didn't achieve anything. Now this is the next option available. Why not give a try? What worse can happen? Worse has already happened. Fine. So maybe we can go for another option, and only by the mistakes, if we will make a mistake, we are also ready to learn it. Now the present decision of Article 370 also is linked with the changing international environment, especially in Afghanistan and China's rising ambitions. Hence, India had to assert that Jammu and Kashmir is India's territory and India will not compromise in any sense, and India will be ready to take the hard decisions. I hope you have got the enough material that you can give the rationale behind this particular strategy. Whether it will be successful or not, we have to see. The situations in Jammu and Kashmir are too complicated that nothing will actually be, we cannot say with surety that something will change, but status quo is also not an option, and we have to go for some options, or some new options also. We have to go for changing the rules of engagement. Now, besides this, you can also give certain suggestions that what a government of India has to do more. So a government of India has to go for the more intellectual, not in terms of human rights, otherwise, intellectual understanding of the situation, understand the situation more rationally, and bring government's responsibility is to bring all stakeholders, so-called our intellectual and human rights activists, government, security forces, army, media on the same front. Then it is such an important issue. We need a dedicated ministry to deal with the issue of Jammu and Kashmir. Now it is very important that government take measures for addressing the concerns of the youth, and the concerns of the youth is not just you provide them employment. There is, because of militancy, people didn't have the normal childhood, so there are a lot of psychological issues also which needs to be tackled, and for that a dedicated ministry is required. Then as far as the Pakistan and international environment is concerned, we need to do effective propaganda management also, the way Pakistan is doing, and at the same time it is also important that India should know how to use social media more effectively. If Pakistan can use, if separatists can use, why can't we use social media in an effective way to change the climate in Kashmir? I think that's all for today. In the discussion, if I have hurt somebody's sentiment, I am sorry. My intention was not to hurt anybody's sentiment. These are not my views. These are the views of which I have formed after reading lot of literature, and these are the views I think are the relevant views if you are preparing this particular topic for your exam. I hope this discussion has helped you. So gradually we are running late by one day, but I would try to make it up, and gradually you will also understand what is the right approach to read newspapers. It's not that every article in the newspaper is written from the perspective of civil services examination, so don't madly rush after the newspapers. Try to understand the issues in the holistic manner. Thank you.